think, yeah, and I'm going to admit everybody from the waiting room, and then we should be good to go.
All right. Hello. Good evening, my wonderful colleagues. This is the Traffic Commission meeting on May 11th, 2023. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of the 2023, this meeting of the Traffic Commission will be conducted via remote participation. We will post an audio recording, audio-video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of these proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting on the City of Somerville website. So this is great. Do we have a quorum for this meeting?
Yes, I believe we have 4 members in attendance.
Okie dokie. My roll call vote, correct, for quorum?
Yes.
Great.
So Chair Lathan,
Yes, here.
Lena Webb,
Here.
Lieutenant Reimel,
Here.
Deputy Chief Tierney,
Here.
and Councilor Gomez Moacad appears to be absent. So that's 4 present and 1 absent.
All right, thank you. All right, meeting ground rules. Listen to the other side, focus on issues, not personalities, avoid questioning motives, and let's be polite. Item number 1, acceptance of the minutes from the April 13th, 2023 Traffic Commission meeting. May I get a motion to accept or reject the minutes?
I'll make a motion to accept.
Can I get a second, Leah?
I'll second.
Can I get a roll call vote to accept item number 1, to accept the minutes, April 13th, 2023?
Yes. Lena Webb,
Yes.
Lieutenant Reimel,
Yes.
Deputy Chief Tierney,
Yes.
and that's 3 yes, 1 abstain, and 1 absent. So the motion carries.
Wonderful. Item number 2, request for accessible parking space at 125 Pennsylvania Avenue. Who from the administration is here to discuss this item?
Good evening, through the chair, Adrian Pomeroy, ADA coordinator with the City of Somerville. I have reviewed the application for an accessible parking residential space at 125 Pennsylvania Avenue and done a site visit, and I recommend that the space be made for accessible parking for this resident.
Any discussion on this item?
I just have a question. That's a difficult intersection at Cross Street East and Pennsylvania Avenue that we looked at along with some of the Broadway changes, and we're gonna look at that a little closer. So I believe 125 is in enough that it won't affect any extension to the fire lanes from the corners, but I just concerned there may be some adjusting of fire lanes at that intersection in the future. So just want to bring it up before we vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Just for my clarification, there are plans to extend the fire lane on that street near that address?
No, but that intersection is a difficult corner for us from Cross Street East onto Pennsylvania Ave. And it is a well-traveled route that we have.
Sure.
So it's something that we are addressing. Hold on one second.
Any further discussion? Questions? Hearing none, can I get a motion to accept or reject item number 2, please, for the accessible parking space at 125 Pennsylvania Avenue?
I'll make a motion to accept.
Can I get a second, Lieutenant Reynolds?
Second.
Roll call vote to accept item number 2, accessible parking at 125 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Yes, and I just want to note for the record that Counselor Gomez Moacad has joined the meeting.
Wonderful.
So welcome, Counselor. Yes, so now we'll take a roll call vote. So Counselor Gomez Moacad,
Since I just arrived, I'm gonna abstain to.
okay. Lena Webb,
Yes.
Lieutenant Rymel,
Yes.
Deputy Chief Tierney,
Yes.
and that's 3 yes and 2 abstain, and the motion carries.
Wonderful. On to item number 3. Request to make the following proposed changes to Article, let's see, that's 7? Pedestrian control regulations, sections 12-1, pedestrian crossing ways or roadways. Who from administration is here to discuss this item? Did I get the correct article number?
I believe it's Article 12.
12, okay, thank you.
Yes, Chair Lathan. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, I can.
Brian Postwaite, Director of Engineering, is here to speak on this matter in lieu of our traffic engineer this evening, who is unavailable.
You have the floor.
Thank you very much. So in light of the appeal that was issued a few months ago and was accepted by the traffic board to remove part of the language of this section, which extended all the way to include the within 300 feet of pedestrians, there was some grammatical and logical concerns with the result of that appeal. And so Jessica Bello, our traffic engineer, and I worked out some revisions to this. We spoke with the law department, with the police department, as well as the parking department to come up with a compromise from the appealed language that would continue to meet the intent of the appeal, but would allow the original half of the language to still function. So just to illustrate, if we had a traffic control signal, and we didn't have a distance within which this regulation applied, somebody could walk 1 foot, and this is hyperbolic, but somebody could walk 1 foot outside of the crosswalk and walk against the light. And so having a distance within which the signal and the crosswalks apply was important to maintain in the regulation. So the relatively simple result after months of discussion was to return the within 300 feet back into the language and only remove the or marked crosswalk. And what that does is it means that whenever you're within 300 feet of an officer directing traffic or within 300 feet of a traffic control signal, you must use a marked crosswalk. But if you're further than 300 feet from either of those items, you are not obligated to use a marked crosswalk according to our regulations. And that met the intent of what the appellants were trying to accomplish with their appeal that was approved. And so that is the first half of the revision that we're proposing. The second half of the revision that we're proposing with respect to the MUTCD markings is simply a housekeeping element. The language in here is old and we don't currently use that. And we wanted to make sure that we brought it up to date with current crosswalk marking standards by the federal MUTCD guidelines, which we do employ in the city. So it's more of a housekeeping thing. It's something that we already do, but we wanted to make sure that people weren't confused about it moving forward. We were here. We felt that that was an appropriate thing to incorporate here.
I know there's a particular hand raised. I want to make sure that we go through the process. for this kind of committee meeting. So committee members, you have questions? This isn't necessarily a public forum hearing meeting. So members of the public, hold on just a minute. Members of the committee, questions?
Through the chair, Director Postlewaite, I got a comment from a constituent asking about, and I think we all saw it. What is, I'm trying to see what is the detriment to using 300 feet versus reducing it. Their argument is that blocks are shorter sometimes than 300 feet.
Thank you, Counselor. Chair Lathan, I assume you're fine with me answering questions from the commission. The answer of that is simply the Commonwealth regulations that mirror this item also use 300 feet. And it is not particularly consistent, or frankly, it would just be inconsistent if Somerville had a different numeral, a different number in there relative to our neighboring communities, which typically follow the state regulations. We're already, the appeal already changed part of it, but we felt from a consistency standpoint, we have multiple officers that operate in the city from time to time, whether they're detail officers or otherwise. We didn't want to move too far away from what the state regulation shows.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Further discussion from the committee? Member of the public that has their hand raised, would you mind putting your question into the chat? This isn't really a public hearing kind of setup that we're doing tonight. Thank you. Committee members, I'm just giving some time for the member from the public to ask a question. The question is, I wanted to bring up the 300 feet to the asking the pedestrians to walk up 598 feet to cross what might be a 25-foot street. Also, isn't it hard to see an officer or signal 300 feet away? Brian, you have any comments on that?
Sure. So I think there's compelling logic to this argument. I'm not so sure about the 598 feet since this is restricted to only locations with traffic signals. So that's a markedly smaller number of area in the city. However, I do think there might be some compelling argument to the 300 feet being able to visibly see and engage with an officer or a signal. That is, I agree, a rather long distance. Something to think about is 5, 10, that's about 15 cars away. Just as a point of reference, it's much further than most of our blocks are long. And it's about half as far as our longer blocks are. So I think there is some argument that 300 feet from just a functional standpoint is longer than would be needed from a safety standpoint. Queue lengths coming from a signalized intersection usually are on the order of 100 to 150 feet. So 300 feet is well beyond the impact of a typical traffic signalized intersection or queue length due to an officer directing traffic, unless you're in a location like Union Square or some of the other really busy intersections. But most of our traffic signals are on comparatively smaller streets, such as Highland Ave, Summer Street, Powderhouse Boulevard, et cetera. But though I think there could be some technical arguments for reducing it to a smaller lineal distance, I would leave it to the commission to decide whether that technical justification overweighs the consistency justification of being consistent with state law or state regulation, I should say. This is not a state law, it's a state regulation. Whether we should remain consistent with state regulation and the regulations of our neighboring communities.
Thank you, Brian. Further discussion on this item? Yes, Councilor Gomez.
That's a question. So when we put this law, we still have Route 16, Route 20, Route 28, all the state-owned have their own that sometimes intersect our neighborhood. I'm a fan of consistency, but somehow the logic here is I'm trying to understand if 300 feet is a larger, it gives us a larger area that doesn't align. So if there is a crosswalk less than 300 feet from the signal, you can cross.
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely.
It's just really jaywalking if there's no crosswalk there. And so now thinking about it out loud, it really is, it would be interesting to see, for example, I'm going to use Lowell Street, that's in our ward, where we don't have, what would be the distance between Princeton, where I have that's my last crosswalk on Lowell before I get to Medford.
If you'll bear with me, I have the map up and I will measure that distance out to give you a sense. Uh, 300 feet would be almost to Richardson Street from Medford Street.
Okay.
In the opposite direction from Princeton, it would be pretty much the top of the bridge where the new MBTA station is roughly 300 feet from Princeton.
So what this tells me, knowing Lowell and Cedar is even more, because that's between Morrison. I don't have a crosswalk between Morrison and Broadway. So what this is telling me is that maybe we have a design issue through our street that sometimes we have these long streets and don't have crosswalks for huge amounts of distance. I just met with DCR on something else where I'm redirecting traffic, and they thought asking anyone to cross more than 1/8 of a mile was too much. So is this an issue truly of we need to reevaluate some of our streets that we don't have crosswalks often enough, and people they just jaywalk because it's just a long distance. What is there I understand that crosswalks have to pertain to many things, so.
I think Counselor and the rest of the commission, I think that leaving the 300 feet would, to a certain degree, compel our street projects to really focus on making sure that there are reasonable crosswalks at a reasonable distance from signalized intersections. And though I think in many places we do have that, thinking of locations such as Hudson Street on both, all of the rangeways adjacent to it, as well as many other locations. But there are many locations such as at Lowell and Medford, where the first crosswalk is a substantial distance away.
Those are my thoughts. Okay, I want to bring this up because this is a concern I'm seeing within my ward. So I will let the other members speak.
Okay, thank you. Leah, I see your hands raised.
Yes, through you, Chair. I'm curious so keeping the 300 will keep us, in, the same, as the state, whatever. What are some negative implications of not keeping 300? What would it being reduced to 150 feet mean? What are some of the issues that could come from not specifying that number as others around us have? As a question, just legit curiosity.
From an engineering standpoint, I think there is a minimum distance where there's a technical safety issue. And I think that is on the order of 100 to 150 feet. That is typical stopping site distances. So you want to make sure that you're far enough away from an intersection when somebody gets a green light, they cross the intersection, they still need to have time to see and stop for somebody because they're probably not looking, they're looking at the traffic light. So I think 150 feet would probably be the minimum from that perspective. You also want to be far enough away from the traffic signal so that you're not crossing in a lengthy queue of cars. Because you don't want to be in a situation where you have a queue of cars backed up because of the red light and you're filtering through that queue of cars. That's a particularly unsafe situation. So to me, that would be the negative of going less than say 150 feet. The range between 150 and 300 feet, I think is probably more of an issue on our more busy intersections. And I just keep thinking of Union Square and Davis Square because I'm in those squares more often, where you have a much longer queue length. But those sections, you also have crosswalks, mid-block crosswalks rather close to it to keep people from queuing over that space and leaving space for pedestrians to cross. I think the only other issue would be a potential enforcement concern of just not being able to manage the situation when an officer is trying to manage the situation. But honestly, that's not my expertise. So I don't want to delve into that too far.
Thanks. Yeah, I feel like also this is a larger thing. Most people want to cross safely. Most people will take advantage of the safe infrastructure that is there when it's there. So I don't think this would cause a jaywalking epidemic or anything. And it feels like it's more of a formality because, this is really about, do you get charged? Is this an enforcement issue? And, it feels like reducing the feet would sort of make it less likely that should you wouldn't necessarily get dinged for jaywalking when it still is, a distance that is tempting, to just go through. And so I guess I do wonder about it from a traffic enforcement perspective. I don't know if
I have a-
Commissioner Reimel wanted to. say
Yeah.
anything, 'cause I was just curious about your expertise.
I'd be
It's a
curious.
matter of practicality and basically convenience when it comes to doing life. There is no jaywalking statute in the city of Somerville. We don't cite people for jaywalking. We don't fine them. It actually comes under a state COR. You'd have to charge them criminally for obstructing, and we're not going to go down that route. We haven't had a jaywalking ticket issued since the early 1970s, and I think the only ones that still do it on their records and on their book was the city of New York, and they were slowly starting to phase it out. So within that 300-foot crosswalk, when I was speaking with some of the people earlier, last week and the week before, it's as Brian said, we don't want to stray too far from the state regulations. If we choose to go on an enforcement level, putting on an ordinance book or something like that, where you're fining people $20 for going against the light, that's something we don't have an effect right now. So it's still kind of an issue that needs to be looked at a little bit further from our perspective as far as enforcement goes. But everything Brian has looked into and Brad looked into is really where the farthest we can go on it right now.
Yes. Councilor Gomez Moker.
Yeah, through the chair, I want Director Postola's opinion. Do you think we could resolve, and this is for the general commission question, think we could resolve this by, us in city council, because I chair the traffic department, is just ask the city to look at all locations where we have, more than 300 feet between crosswalks. We start exploring that, because I know my ward, so I know it well. But maybe this is, and I think that's a real concern to me, because it's like sometimes these are high, like Cedar, people go very quickly. I'm all over Cedar because I literally get calls from constituent. Like the latest one was a Brazilian constituent, me with my Spanish and she with her Portuguese. We're trying to communicate. But there's a true concern in all of these areas. And I think that this is highlighting something that needs to be, I think I'm going to be in the spirit of, we really need the infrastructure to walk safely. So I'm happy to put an order on that. That is not, I don't want to overwhelm you with, you have a lot of work already, but I think that I would like your opinion on that idea.
I think if we move forward with the 300 feet, which to me sounds reasonable given what we're talking about here, I think that would really encourage our team to really do that analysis to find what are the critical intersections where that 300 feet could become a hardship. And I think providing those locations throughout the city is a pretty reasonable request.
Okay. I mean, I through the chat, I would feel comfortable if we went that route, and I'm happy. Because again, I want to see, we're asking people to walk more. We want to make sure that we give them the opportunities to cross safely. So that would be, and I want to say I did get stopped once, probably 10 years ago, by an officer in Davis Square, but he said, "You're not being safe," when I was jaywalking in front of Diesel. So but all they said was, "You're not being safe." All right. He was trying to look after me. All right. Thank you.
So I just have a question. I'm just kind of questioning this particular item, and like I said, in this particular forum, for us to be voting on this kind of item. And this, I don't know if this is within the parameters of this particular committee. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, Chair Lathan, this is a traffic regulation, and this commission is the only commission authorized to revise our traffic regulations.
Oh. Further discussion? Yeah, Leah?
I guess just one thing is that like this would obviously be great to push the city to like really consider that, adding crosswalks now that we kind of focus about this more. But like, I think to me, the issue is for the way the conditions are now and how people are, moving within the conditions that are here now, and whether or not, if they cross, less. And again, I've looked at the distances on some of these streets, and I would echo Councilor Gomez Mucad wanting to kind of get the data on how much of our city is like that. And even if the initial estimate is like a lot, I think that, I understand the minimum safety thing, but I feel like I feel like the minimum is kind of the most fair for the conditions that currently exist in our city. Maybe other cities are different, but for Somerville, how things are now.
Okay. Further discussion? Thanks for that clarification, Director. I think for me, I just want to make sure that we are weighting out appropriately items before us, and that we're clear what our boundaries are and what our purview is. Sometimes I think I just want us to make sure that as committee members that we're having the robust discussions needed before we approve such items, and that we're doing our due diligence. So that's where my concerning questions are coming from. Any further discussion? All right, can I request a vote on item number 3, either to accept or reject the request to make the following proposed changes to Article 12, pedestrian control regulations, sections 12-1, pedestrian crossing crossways or roadways.
Commissioner Chair, Commissioner Lathan, may I offer one point of order? A no vote results in this language you see in front of you without the 300 feet, because the board has already accepted the change that removes or marked crosswalks within 300 feet of the pedestrian. So the current language is unenforceable, and I don't think it's too strong to say rather meaningless without a distance associated with it. So I want people to understand what a no and a yes vote would mean.
Given that description, any questions from the committee or concerns? Everyone understands what a no vote means? Right. A motion to accept or reject item number 3, please. The silence maybe speaks volumes. What kind of concerns or questions do we have? Leah, you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, Brian, that just that confused me. It is confusing just because we've got red text and struck out red text and black.
Okay. So
can we
go through
it again?
You're absolutely right. Give me Chair or Secretary, would it help if I could share my screen? What you see in front of you is the change from the pre-appeal language. And I was using the pre-appeal language because I felt that it would be more familiar to you. But it might be helpful for me to put up on the screen what the current language is based on the appeal. Is that something that we can do?
I can stop sharing my screen, and you can share your screen, Brian.
Okay.
Okay, you should be able to share your screen now.
Thank Thank you so much. Hopefully that's visible. And I'll zoom in if I can remember how to zoom in. Page width. So this section here is the appeal language, or appealed, I should say, in past tense. So this is just a red line of the first sentence. The actual language says this: pedestrians shall obey the direction of police officers directing traffic, and whenever there is an officer directing traffic, a traffic control signal, no such pedestrian shall cross a way or roadway except within the limits of the marked crosswalk and as hereinafter provided in these regulations. So two concerns with that. One of it's grammatical because we lost the or. But the other piece is that there is no boundary to what this language refers to.
So Brian, excuse me, a yes vote would keep it as is, and the no vote would go with the new appealed
No,
guidelines.
Correct. A no vote would put it as, sorry,
Puts the appeal language into effect.
leaves the appeal language in effect because it's already been appealed.
Okay.
A yes vote, and I'm going to call this proposed, May 2023. A proposed vote, a yes vote accepts the proposed language as I have it up here. Would it help if I read it? Which is what we've been talking about.
Yes, please read.
Okay. A yes vote would state the following: pedestrians shall obey the directions of police officers directing traffic, and whenever there is an officer directing traffic or a traffic control signal within 300 feet of a pedestrian, no such pedestrian shall cross a way or roadway except within the limits of the marked crosswalk, and as hereinafter provided in these regulations.
If I'm understanding correctly, the old language at one moment also included crosswalks?
The proposed language also includes redefining a crosswalk to current MUTCD. I think it would be fine to sever that if or we could come back and fix that later. I'm not as worried about that. I feel like the crosswalk, the jaywalking component, the first sentence is the critical piece here.
Leah, you had your hand raised?
So I wonder if, I mean, it sounds like 300 is too much and 0 is too little. You know, we're Somerville, we're different, we're unique. Is there a possibility of making a motion or somehow in this meeting settling on 150 feet and agreeing to the proposed text with a shortened distance?
So as a point of clarification, there is the ability for a commission member to propose an amendment that could include an amendment to amend the distance, and then that could be voted on.
But I believe you first have to move to vote on the item, and then you can move to add an amendment to that item.
Can I ask a quick question through the chair? Is there any moment there's a strange overlap? I'm not as concerned with Route 16 because it's kind of more on the margins, but Route 28 bisects us. Is there any moment that we have a jurisdiction strange overlap there? I'm assuming it's state road. If we need a detail, it's state police there. So they will follow their regulations. Because I'm on a conundrum here because I'm not a fan of changing. I would like to be consistent across. but I also understand we don't, 300 feet just doesn't, what I would like to do is see a graphic of where you have the three, draw like a radius of all our street lights, for example, and say what is 300 feet from there. But that's all, I don't know if that's too much to ask, but.
I'm just gonna put this out there. I don't know if this, at this time, that we have enough information to really do a solid, educated vote, yes or no, on this evening, to be quite honest. I'm seeing a lot of hesitation and a lot of questions. It seems like we may need some more informations and some more models, maybe, Brian. I just wanted to make sure that we're really aware and doing our due diligence before, on this item. It may appear simple, but there's a lot of silence tonight.
Chair Lathan, I think that is perfectly reasonable from our perspective. The one thing that I would request is for you all to think either this evening or later next week, give us some details that would help you think this through more thoroughly. I'm hearing one key item from Councilor Mokad, and that is to provide some sort of map showing either the nearest crosswalk to each intersection or a boundary around each intersection, showing what the 300 and or 150 feet or something like that would, just to illustrate it. That we could do that pretty easily citywide, I think. So that was one thing I hear, and we can definitely help with that. I'm also hearing some concern about state routes versus city routes, because anything that even the appeal doesn't apply to state routes within the city borders. So we could also highlight the state routes on that map so that it's clear what it applies to. But if there's anything else that would help you understand this proposal better, we're happy to provide it. I just need to know what it is.
Jill, if I could, to you.
Yes.
I think I'm thinking to just specifically a law enforcement or police officer's point of view. I think we're all in agreement that the safety of the pedestrians is paramount on this topic. I would not be opposed to tabling it, maybe not as far as the next meeting, but maybe a special meeting just on this subject until we get better language on it before we make a final agreement. And if we come up with a solution that's less than 300 or somewhere in a halfway point or whatever, but something that's involves the overall safety and well-being of the pedestrians. I got a little confused there towards the end with the no and yes proposed. So I'd like to see a little bit more guidance on it before I take a vote on it. No, nothing opposed to you, Brian. Like, everything is, with Brad, everything looked great. But to make a decision tonight without getting a little bit more feedback on it, from a safety point of view, I would like to get a little more information on it, a little more feedback.
Yes, Councilor Gomez-Mocad.
Yeah, I just want to request, I think if we do a drawing where all the street signals of 300-foot radius and then indicate what roads the crosswalk is like more than 300 feet from that radius, and within that, I think that would help us understand the situation. I think those are the graphics I would ask for, because when you get to, for example, it becomes an issue. I think Union Square, Davis have more, because we've thought more about how pedestrians move there. It's the more isolated areas that become a little bit more problematic. And I happen to have 2 of them in my ward, so that's why I'm a little bit, I'm passionate about Cedar and Lowell, but that's my thing. All right, thank you.
Before we move on to make a motion to table this for discussion, I just wanted to just read a comment or chat from members of the public. Mr. Mainhold, apologies if I'm out of order, but this is but is this 300 feet along the signal side right away or 300-foot radius?
Chair, I'm assuming that's directed to me. I'm not sure. I saw that question earlier and I'm not sure I understand the difference between those two. But the 300-foot distance would be the distance from the signalized intersection. But that would be the same as drawing a radius around the intersection, crossing over each of the legs of the intersection. So I think it's one and the same.
Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you, committee members, for just really just taking our time and being conscientious, especially when it comes to pedestrian safety. That is the role that I want to make sure that we're always very in tune to in this committee. So hearing what we talked about in discussions and the pauses that we have, I'd like to put a motion on the table to table this for further discussion.
Second.
Jackie, are we missing any procedural issues?
I don't believe so. So the motion to table has been made by Chair Lathan and seconded by Lieutenant Reimel. Now we would just take a roll call vote.
Great. Roll call vote, please, to table this item for further discussion.
Councilor Gomez Moacad,
Yes.
Lena Webb,
Yes.
Lieutenant Reimel,
Yes.
Deputy Chief Tierney,
Yes.
and that's 4 yes and 1 abstain. So the motion to table carries.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Brian.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the thoughtful discussion. Have a good evening.
You too.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, moving on. Item number 4, regarding the curb on the west side of Lincoln Parkway from approximately 35 feet south of the Argenziano parking lot driveway to approximately 75 feet south. Request to convert 40 feet of residential permit parking to active school arrival dismissal only between 7 a.m. and 3 p.m. Monday through Friday, and a residential permit parking at all other times. Who is here from administration to discuss this?
Through the chair, Greg Hannafin, Transportation Planner in the Mobility Division.
Wonderful.
And I have some slides to share to add some additional context to this item.
Thank you.
Is everyone seeing my screen now? Okay, so the goal of this item is to improve the safe arrival and dismissal options at the Argenziano School. Some background: the school administration requested support from Mobility in relocating vehicle arrival and dismissal activities from the traffic circle off of Washington Street. And this proposal has been reviewed by Mobility, Parking Department, and the Fire Department, and has been okayed by each of those bodies. Some context of the area we're talking about: this is the Argenziano School here. This is the traffic circle that is currently used for the majority of the vehicle arrival and dismissal activities that the school is seeking to close to pick up a drop off at this time. And the area in the box here is the area where we are recommending adding additional arrival and dismissal, a zone for arrival and dismissal for vehicles. So this blue area is where is the 40 feet of residential permit parking, so about 2 permit parking spaces that abuts the sidewalk adjacent to the Argenziano playground. In the red are fire lanes for no stopping. So we are recommending that this resident parking be converted to arrival and dismissal only between 7 and 3 a.m. Monday through Friday to give another option for vehicles dropping off and picking up students.
So I have a question. Arrival and dismissal, are you just talking throughout the school year? Because that would be a limited time frame. Summertime, have we talked about when this is actually active?
So it would be active. Currently, how have been operating these arrival and dismissal zones are during the school year, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then at all other times, this space would be resident permit parking.
And remind me again, how is that communicated? Through signage?
Yes. Yeah, we would be putting up new signs here that describe the regulations.
Further discussion from the committee? Hearing none. Yep.
Yes, through the chair, Greg, I do have a question. So my daughter used to go to the Argenziano. It seems like there's a lot of activity on Washington Street. How do they actively, does the school actively get a lot of people going through this entrance? Because now you're asking them to go up. If you're coming from the other side of Washington, you're going to go up Prospect. We all know the Prospect Hill Academy drop off is quite a sight for sore eyes. And then you're asking parents to go around. I'm not opposed to this, but I'm just pointing out that folks do the path of least resistance. And the Rotary is completely opposite of this. So we're trying to replace the Rotary. We're asking parents to go quite a distance. That's just my comment right there.
So the school has observed some unsafe behaviors in the Rotary, some dangerous conditions for students, which we have also captured drone footage and observed that as well. And the goal of this arrival dismissal zone is to provide an alternative option. We're not expecting that that everyone will use this new space. Families are still allowed to park in the neighborhoods around the Argenziano school. So this is just giving an alternative option for families that this may work for. Right now, there's really no space on this side of the school for arrival and dismissal, pickup, drop off.
I understand. When my daughter used to go to Argenziano, I did what, the buses are there, parents are going around the bus in unsafe ways. But my only issue is, do we need to have an equivalent on Washington Street? I know we don't want to, honestly, we want to encourage folks to walk to school as much as possible, or ride their bikes or whatever. But when it does happen, my question is, do we need to provide, it's a question, not a something on Washington Street to avoid unsafe conditions?
I think that that question is, while it's related, I don't think that the two are necessarily exclusive. So for this item, we're focusing on this area of the school in direct response to a request from the school to help support arrival and dismissal activities on Lincoln Parkway. The So I don't want to speak to what can be done on Washington Street.
I'm just as a parent, my parent observer. I mean, this is also safer because you're opening the passenger door into a sidewalk as well. I'm trying to think. Yes, you always do. No, I have no further comments. I just was making that observation. I didn't mean to derail us, but I did.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. May I get the agenda back up so I can see this, make sure I'm referencing that correct? All right, may I get a motion to accept or reject item number 4, the curb on the west side of Lincoln Parkway from approximately 35 feet south of Virginia Yard parking lot driveway to approximately 75 feet south. Request to convert 40 feet of residential permit parking to active school arrival dismissal only between 7 a.m. and 3 p.m. Monday through Friday, and residential parking permit parking at all other times. Councilor Goldes Molcat, can I get a motion to reject or accept?
Motion to approve.
I'll second that.
Can I get a roll call vote, please, on item number 4 to approve?
Yes. Counselor Gomez Moacad,
Yes.
Lena Webb,
Yes.
Lieutenant Raimel,
Yes.
Deputy Chief Tierney,
Yes.
and that's 4 yes and 1 abstain, and the motion carries.
Wonderful. Moving on to item number 5, requests for the following changes to curb use in Union Square. It's A, B, C. I believe, Greg, you're going to talk about this item as well. Can you please go through each item, A, B, and C, please?
Yes, that is correct. I have some more slides to share. So some additional background, again, for this item, we know that accessible parking and loading are key curb space needs in the Union Square Business District. The Mobility Division has been undergoing a district-wide approach to evaluating curb management in Union Square. And we have been engaging in ongoing discussions with stakeholders to identify opportunities for curb management improvements. And this includes the Commission for Persons with Disabilities, Union Square Main Streets, and directly with businesses. So this map is showing the Somerville Ave and Bow Street triangle, Bow Street and Somerville Ave here. These are the existing locations of loading zones and accessible parking. The loading zones represented by a truck, and the accessible parking represented by symbol of a wheelchair. And I'll note that this loading zone down here is a single space loading zone of like 20 feet, which is shorter than our typical 40-foot loading zones. So we, the 3 A, B, and C items are shown here on this proposed accessible parking and loading zone map. And I'll start with item A, which is the accessible space. The Mobility Division has been engaging with the Commission for Persons with Disabilities because we know that accessible parking is a big need within Union Square. We heard from the Commission that in particular, there is a lack of accessible parking that provides easy access to the post office, which is shown here with the little letter. In particular, a space on the same side of the street as the post office. This space, even though it's directly across from the post office, requires crossing 3 crossings in order to get there. So this space was one that the mobility division recommended based on what we had heard from the commission. And I'll ask Adrienne Pomeroy, the ADA coordinator, if she has any additional context from the commission.
Thank you, Greg, through the chair. Just to echo what Greg said, the commission was approached 2 or 3 times about Union Square, as often mobility does with other projects within the city. And initially, as we can see here, it looks like there is quite a few accessible parking spots. But it was really important to that body of constituents that there would be one at that particular point near the post office, one for accessibility, because as we know, Union Square is quite busy, no matter what part of the sort of triangle you're on. And that particular stretch of Bow Street is often very congested. So crossing the street with any sort of mobility device or assistance sometimes can be problematic. And people use the post office every day. So I am in full support along with the commission to add this additional spot here. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrienne. And this is a street view of where the current metered parking spaces that we are recommending converting to an accessible space. So it's the, this space was identified because it is close to a curb cut. The 2 proposed loading zones, these were loading zone requests that came in from businesses in Union Square. This location here, the request came in from Bombay Market, which is directly next to the proposed area. They requested 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. loading zone and metered parking for the rest of the day. This southern request came in from 2 businesses, Mama Gina's, which is right on the corner, and then Midnight Convenience, which is directly next to the loading zone. And this is the space where there is currently a 20-foot loading zone, and they've requested to extend that to 2 spaces for the standard 40-foot loading zone. And this would be an all-day loading zone. And the mobility division feels that these 2 locations are areas of Union Square that would benefit from additional loading, not just the businesses that requested it, but other businesses in the district as well. And these are those 2 spaces. So this is item 5B in front of Bombay Market and also close to a curb cut for easier loading activities. And then this is the location on Somerville Ave by Webster Ave, which would be extending this first space, which is already a loading zone, to 2 spaces to create a standard size loading zone. So happy to answer any questions.
Questions, discussion from the committee? Hearing none, may I get a motion to accept or reject item number 5, requests for the following changes to the curbs in Union Square? A, B, and C, based on Greg's presented?
I'll make a motion to approve.
All right, can I get a second, Mr. Narayan?
Second that, yep.
Roll call vote to approve item number 5, please.
Councilor Gomez Moacad,
Yes.
Lena Webb,
Yes.
Lieutenant Reimel,
Yes.
Deputy Chief Tierney,
Yes.
and that's 4 yes, 1 abstain, and the motion carries.
All right, thank you. Moving on to item number 6. Powder House Boulevard restriping, A, B, C, and D. Greg?
Chair Leif, I'm actually going to do that.
Justin, we get you? All righty.
Good evening. And I'm just going to pull up paving parking plans. So just here for 1 moment. Folks can see my screen. All right. So make sure you can see my screen now. Yes. Okay. So the city is working on a refreshing of the pavement markings on Powerhouse Boulevard. The pavement markings were implemented back in 2019, and it really almost completely faded away at this point. So, the main goal here is to refresh the pavement markings. And for the most part, they're not going to change, but we are planning on making a number of small changes to the pavement markings. So the main change
is flipping the parking lane and the bike lane from Powder House Circle to Packard Ave. And that's what's shown on the screen here. When the street was restriped in 2019, it was set up so that you could sort of easily swap those two facilities in the future, and we were, anticipating that's something we would want to do in the future. So that's the main thing to talk about tonight. In addition, where the bike lane becomes a standard bike lane next to parking after Packard Ave, we're adding a little bit of a buffer between the parking lane and the bike lane. There's no curbside regulations associated with that change. And then the last change is to add 6 new speed humps on this section where the protected bike lane would be. And that's because we're going to have, slightly narrower than normal travel lanes. We want to make sure that traffic is slow. This section today is a lot faster than the section from Packard to North Street, where we have the speed humps in today. So we want to add speed humps in this section as well. So there are really only minor changes to curbside regulations proposed, and that's why we're here tonight to talk about those. And the first is item 6A regarding the curb on the north side of Powder House Boulevard opposite Leonard Street. Request to convert approximately 10 feet of permit parking only to no parking anytime. So that's shown on the screen here. This crosswalk opposite Leonard Street. We think we need a little more than the standard 20-foot distance from the crosswalk because we're going around a curve here. And in addition, we want to make sure that if folks that are in the bike lane want to exit the bike lane, they have a little extra room to maneuver over to the crosswalk there. So the 20 feet distance, that's already covered by our existing regulations, which don't allow parking within 20 feet of a crosswalk. The ask here is where you see the 30 feet. It's just to extend that an additional 10 feet. And, on a stretch this long with no driveways, this is going to have sort of minimal to no impact on parking capacity. And I'll just keep going to B if there are no questions on that. Regarding the curb on the north side of Powder House Boulevard opposite Burnham Street, request to convert approximately 40 feet of permit parking only to no parking anytime. So that's on the left side of my screen here. In this location, we're asking for an additional 40 feet on the far side of this crosswalk, in addition to the 20-foot distance from the crosswalk. And the primary reason for that is to add a bicycle box for left turns. Again, we have a very long stretch where the bike lane is behind parking, where there are no gaps to get out, essentially. So this is to make sure that people who are biking can turn left onto Burnham Street, and it provides a space for them to wait. And that impacts approximately 2 permanent parking spaces. Moving on to the next item, regarding the curb on the north side of Powder House Boulevard opposite Mason Street, request to convert approximately 50 feet of permanent parking only to no parking anytime. So that's this entire section here. There are no crosswalks here currently, so parking would normally be permitted along this entire section. It's the same reason. It's to have a space for people biking, turning left, and we don't want parked cars right up against that space, because when someone is in the bike box waiting, we want them to be visible by traffic moving in each direction, and that impacts approximately 2.5 parking spaces there. Part D of this item is right up at Packard Ave. This is where the protected bike lane ends, and this is where it turns into sort of a standard bike lane next to a lane of parking. This reads regarding the curb on the north side of Powderhouse Boulevard from approximately 40 feet east of Packard Ave to 50 feet east of Packard Ave. Request to convert 10 feet of permanent parking only to no parking anytime. So the 10 feet we're talking about is, zoom in a little bit more. This shadow right here is the no parking here at a corner sign. So just to make enough space for this bike lane transition, we're extending that another 10 feet to where you see the cutout for the parking lane. So today parking is permitted up to the sign, and the 10 feet is to extend it. And again, on a stretch this long with no driveways or curb cuts on this side of the street, this really has minimal to no impact on parking capacity. And that is it for item 6. Happy to take any questions.
Great. Discussions from the committee?
So I have one question. It's not fire related, but is it necessary for the 2 left-hand turn lanes and giving up parking spaces for Burnham and Mason Street? Is there numbers to justify the number of people going up? Mason Street is, as you know, a pretty good hill. Are people really going up that hill versus going down Burnham, the next street over? Just a thought.
We don't have traffic data for bike left turns here. I think our thought is if there's a place where bikes can legally go left, that we should provide a way for them to do so. So that's what's reflected here.
And how many spaces do we give up by the 2 of those? 4?
This is about, it's 50 feet, this one. So it's 2.5, I guess, but it's depending on how you measure. I think it's probably closer to 2, just because on a stretch this long of parking, people aren't necessarily parking, nose to nose. So the extra 10 feet, we usually estimate approximately 20 feet per space. So it's between 2 and 3, but I think it's more likely 2 spaces.
And what's the distance between that left turn and the other one that we made on Burnham?
It's 1 block. It's probably about 300 feet or so.
So in 300 feet, we're losing 5 spaces?
1, 2. It's just, excuse me, 1 moment. 4 spaces. 4.
4. It just seems a little redundant to me, if you're taking a left, the outlet for Burnham on Broadway and the outlet for Mason are essentially in the same spot. Mason's quite the hill. The losing the parking seems like maybe are too necessary. But we can hear other thoughts. Thank you.
All right. Any further discussion?
Hi, Chair Lathan. Through you, just mostly a comment. I think it probably would be closer to 2 spaces, just because cars are really big and tall, and so every time at every corner and intersection when the parking is restricted, and as I believe it is actually city policy for at least for crosswalks, it's the same logic. Like, that's a wide street, and if someone's going to make that left turn, you really don't want that person to be turning right in front of your vehicle and you know, coming out of nowhere. I think a lot of the times it's like, oh, pedestrians and cyclists, people that are smaller than cars come out of nowhere, but A lot of that is because of that visibility issue. So I do support any time when a vulnerable road user like a pedestrian or a cyclist is going to be hopping out from behind large parked cars, that it makes sense to have a little bit of space so that they're visible. So I do see the logic there, and I feel like it's a reasonable amount of space to give to that safety feature.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, may I get a motion to accept or reject item number 6, A, B, C, and D?
I'll make a motion to accept.
May I get a second? Timmy? Sean? Can I get a second? How about you, Lieutenant Rimo? Can I get a
Second it.
All righty. All right, cool. Wonderful. Roll call vote, please, to approve item number 6.
Councilor Gomez Moacad,
Yes.
Lena Webb,
Yes.
Lieutenant Rimo,
Yes.
Deputy Chief Tierney,
Yes.
and that's 4 yes and 1 abstain, and the motion carries.
All righty. Moving on to item number 7. This is a marathon one for us tonight, committee members. East Broadway bus lanes and crosswalk improvements, A, B, C, D, E, F. This seems to go on further. The Broadway South Side, McGrath Highway to Mount Vernon Street. That's G, H, I, J, K, I, L, M, N, O, P, Q. And on to Cross Street, north of Broadway. R, and Franklin Street, south of Broadway, S and T. I'm kind of disappointed we're not getting to Z this evening.
Chair Lathan, I'm also here to present on behalf, and apologies in advance for the length of changes we're talking about here. Just stand by one moment while I share my screen.
I just must say, look how beautiful and clean our city looks. We must have a phenomenal DPW department.
Yes, they're groovy.
It's a lovely photo, I agree. And so we gave the Traffic Commission an initial briefing on this project last month. Got some great feedback from you all, continue to get feedback from the community, and now we're here sort of asking for the changes associated with this project. So I'm not going to repeat everything I said last month, but I've got just a quick recap of what this project is. It is to extend the existing Central Hill bus lanes from their current terminus at McGrath to just past Cross Street. So it's really, in the grand scheme of things, we're talking about 2 blocks more of bus lane is the sort of major project element. At the same time, we're looking at the bus stops along East Broadway. There are a number that are too close together. There are a number that are way, way too short, and the bus can't actually reach the curb. And we want to make sure that these are compliant bus stops. We're also improving pedestrian safety at crosswalks by making them more visible, and then finally increasing the number of accessible parking spaces in line with our city policy for commercial areas to offer at least 5% accessible parking spaces. So the changes that we're talking about tonight are to move a couple bus stops or lengthen bus stops, and in the case when we're doing that, we're going to be displacing what is already there. We're also consolidating 2 bus stop pairs, again, because they're too close together. So there's a couple bus stop pairs that go away entirely. The actual bus lane itself only impacts a single parking space. And then, based on the feedback we've heard from residents, from businesses along East Broadway, changes to loading zone meters and other regulations based on that feedback. So the main thrust here is the bus lane, but it's also an opportunity to make sure things are working well for the business district as well. So here's a quick overview of the bus stop changes. The pair at Cross Street, and I should say Cross Street East, the westbound bus stop heading away from Sullivan Square is going to remain the same, although we're going to make it a little bit longer. The eastbound location heading towards Sullivan Square in front of Joe's Liquors, that's actually going to be moved a little bit further upstream Broadway between Cross and Autumn Street. At Indiana Ave and Michigan Ave, the two westbound bus stops at those two streets heading away from Sullivan Square are going to be consolidated to a single sort of more centrally located stop at Illinois Ave. And then Glen Street, Franklin Street, the two eastbound stops heading towards Sullivan are going to be consolidated to a more centrally located stop just across from the East Branch Library on the far side of Glen Street. And then finally, the MacArthur Street and Kensington Ave pair we're proposing to be removed entirely. They would end up being extremely close to some of the other bus stops here. A little bit about the outreach we've completed so far. We've had 3 on-street pop-up events. You can see us there out at Broadway and Cross Street on March 30th. We had another event at the Somerville Community School, and then our last one is at Broadway at Franklin Street. We estimate we spoke to over 200 people at those 3 events. We also had virtual office hours, which are not as well attended, but there were 2 chances for folks that were less comfortable either talking in person or wanted to have a more one-on-one with the city staffer, March 28th and March 19th. We have been partnering with the Summer Viva staff to make sure that we're speaking different languages when we're talking to East Broadway businesses. It's particularly important in East Somerville. We've had some assistance from East Somerville Main Streets and Economic Development in getting the word out to different businesses. Our digital and print outreach materials are available in all of our most commonly spoken languages in Somerville. And we also did direct flyering to residences that are near the bus lane itself. We have established a project website, again available in the 6 languages, and also getting the word out through various newsletters and social media accounts. A couple more things we would like to do, assuming a positive vote tonight, and we want to pivot more towards implementation. So there's a couple things we want to do ahead of implementation. We have some, individualized flyers for each bus stop that's changing to show people where they need to go. And we're sort of relying on pictures to show that, so it's really understandable by many different people. There'll be MBTA alerts online and MBTA signage at bus stops. We are holding off until after Carnival so we can share information at Carnival as well. We'll keep using the city newsletters and social media. And then, in advance of when we are actually going to be out on the street completing the project, a reverse 311 to nearby addresses people signed up for city alerts to let them know about potential construction impacts. Last thing, so just changes since we talked a month ago. Thank you to the deputy chief. We've worked with the fire department to test some turns on Broadway to make sure that the new parking regulations wouldn't inhibit vehicle movements. We also were able to do a test on Cross Street East, and that allowed us to propose sort of shortening a no parking zone and establishing a new loading zone outside of Project Soup, which is a real high turnover location that doesn't have a lot of good parking options there. We talked a little bit to the East Branch Library to make sure that their book deliveries had a place to go. And then mostly minor modifications in specific locations based on requests from stakeholders. So making sure we're preserving a loading zone that was going to be displaced by a relocated bus stop by moving it down the block, adding some parking meters on Franklin Street. And, one other thing we're able to do is the parking meters are relatively long spaces on most of Broadway. So in some cases, we can sort of respace the meters themselves, the meter heads themselves, to preserve additional spaces. Quick illustrative overview of the bus lane. Essentially, we're talking about taking that secondary travel lane that's between McGrath and Cross Street and reserving it for the bus in both directions. And parking is to the right of that bus lane. The other travel lane is to the left. We're preserving all of the left turn lanes that exist today. And then after approximately Rush Street, the bus lane ends and merges when there's a single travel lane on Broadway. Just quick overview of the clear corners piece, which we're doing at the same time. This is just enforcing the no parking within 20 feet of an intersection or crosswalk. You can see on the left, those cars are parked right up at the stop line, and they're hiding that you can see on the right, people crossing the street, and also, other vehicles trying to make turns. So I'm happy to get into the details, but I'm willing to pause here in case there are any questions, or I can also just keep going right into each of these. And yes, there's quite a few.
Any questions before we go through the alphabet on this? All right, go ahead, Justin.
So first, item A. This is the bus stop at Kensington Ave in front of Louis, former Louis. In this case, this is the existing regulations with the MBTA bus stop, and we are proposing to extend the 2-hour parking except by permit. And then I also have noted the no parking anytime regulations. That's not a part of this agenda item, but I just put it there so that you were aware of why this green box was not longer. So it's just the rest of the block is 2-hour except by permit, extending that and adding an additional single parking space here where the bus stop used to be. And I'm just going to keep going unless someone raises their hand, or chair, feel free to stop me at any time. This is the bus stop in front of Project Soup at Cross Street East. This bus stop is particularly problematic because the bus really cannot reach the curb. The bus needs about 14 feet in front of this curb extension to get out from in front of the curb extension. And when people are parked in this metered parking space, the bus stop is usually, not able to reach the curb. And that's a problem because then people have to step into the street. People with disabilities can't use the ramp that can be deployed off the bus. So we're just asking to extend that bus stop and displace that single parking meter there. And that's item 7B. Item 7C is at Michigan Ave. This is a bus stop that's going to be consolidated and moved sort of to the other side of the East Branch Library. So the request here is to extend the metered parking regulation. And then we have the 20-foot distance from the crosswalk. Although it's only 10 feet, we think that we can respace these parking meters and add an additional parking meter along this stretch. That's item 7C. Items 7D and E are where that bus stop we were just discussing is being relocated to. So this is in front of Rincon between Indiana Ave and Illinois Ave. We have a loading zone and meter parking today. And the request is for a MBTA bus stop. And then, in working with these businesses, it was more important to retain the loading zone. So we have at the other end of the block relocated that loading zone. This is just on the other side of Indiana Ave. So we've just added a bus stop on the far side of Indiana Ave. This bus stop would be extremely close to the next bus stop. So we're proposing to remove it and add metered parking in that location. So we've just traveled along the north side of Broadway, and now we're gonna go back over to McGrath on the south side of Broadway. We are just after MacArthur Street. So MacArthur is the one right after McGrath, after the gas station there. This is the single parking space that is impacted by the bus lane. It's metered parking today. We're asking for it to be no parking anytime. When at the intersection with McGrath, It is a 3-lane cross section, so there's 2 travel lanes that come over to this side, and there's the bus lane. And we're merging those 2 travel lanes into one, and the bus lane is going to come off the curb and join into that second travel lane. And it's just not quite enough room to get the bus over without removing a single parking space. So that's item 7G. The next one is up at Cross Street. This is item 7H and I. And in this location, we have the bus stop in front of Joe's Liquors, and there's a bank of metered parking behind that. This might be the worst bus stop on this entire project. The bus has no way to get to the sidewalk here. It often actually loads up at the intersection in the curb extension. This is a 35-foot bus stop, which really the bus has no way to actually reach the curb. So we're proposing moving the bus stop back, giving it a little more space. And then in talking with Joe's Liquors, there was a desire for a loading zone in front there. So we're establishing a new loading zone there. Moving down the corridor, so we're moving towards Sullivan Square. This is at Rush Street. This is a request for 7J to take a single metered parking space and add an accessible parking space. So this is one of 3 accessible parking spaces we're adding. And this location is near some businesses, and also importantly, it's near curb cut to be able to get a wheelchair onto the sidewalk. Item 7K, this is the bus stop in front of La Brasa on the near side of Glen Street. Another bus stop that's entirely too short, and the bus has a real hard time getting to the curb. We're proposing to remove it and relocate it and add metered parking. And then I've also shown the 20-foot distance from the crosswalk where parking is not permitted. This is just the next block between Glen and Cutter. So this is where we're proposing to move that bus stop. We just removed 2. Today we have fire hydrant, we have 15-minute parking, metered parking, and a loading zone. There's a couple things going on here. We have Ola Cafe, so short-term parking is important to them. We also have the laundromat, which has its own parking lot, but still short-term parking is important to them. And then Gaucho's Restaurant, which actually has outdoor dining, which for most of the year occupies this loading zone. So the request here is to relocate that bus stop. We're putting a loading zone mid-block so that it can be used by folks going to La Cafe or folks going to the laundromat. And then the rest of the block is proposed to be metered parking, although, in the warmer months, 2 or 3 of those spaces do get used by the Gaucho's outdoor dining parklet. Items 7, O, and P, again, moving down the corridor, this is just past Franklin Street. This is a bus stop we're proposing to consolidate, so to remove. And we're just going to extend the other regulations that are on this block and add a second accessible parking space. So here are the proposed regulations. An accessible parking space right next to the crosswalk, a pair of parking meters, and then a 40-foot loading zone. And we're almost done, I promise. We're here past George Street. This is the last location we're proposing adding a 3rd accessible parking space. So sort of just spacing them out along the block. The other 3 that exist today are on the north side. So the 3 that we're adding to get to 5% are on the south side. So this is the 3rd accessible parking space. And then there's 2 changes on side streets. So we're now looking at Cross Street East here, and Broadway is the left of the screen, going up and down. This is the location where we're able to work with the deputy chief to shorten this no parking anytime regulation, and then add a loading zone and replace one permanent parking space with a loading zone. So this loading zone will be in effect 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. and it'll be permanent parking only overnight. This is Project Soup right here, the food pantry, and there's a lot of turnover, a lot of green cab taxis coming here. So, you know, providing a space for that sort of short-term activity was important. And then, you know, finally, in response to some of the requests for additional short-term parking on side streets, and also to replace some of the parking meters that were displaced on Broadway for loading zones or other regulations. Items 7S and T are requests to take 2 spaces on either side of Franklin Street at Broadway and to make them a pair of metered parking spaces on each side of the street. All right, that was a lot, I know, so I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Questions, concerns from the committee? Well, I just like to say that I am very proud and happy about the due diligence and the hard work that the transportation team is doing throughout the city to provide safer streets for our pedestrians, for our bikers, for our buses, for really attending to our most vulnerable populations and doing some really incredible street design. And I really appreciate the presentation. I appreciate the hard work that you guys have done throughout the year, coming before this committee. Somerville is really, in my opinion, really trying hard to make sure that people can travel safely in our community. So I just wanted to thank you, Justin, and the whole transportation team and mobility team for just really paying close attention and actually caring about Somerville.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate that.
I second that.
Well, yes, wholeheartedly.
And we have a third.
I third that too. And I do want to also comment that as we, in the past, I appreciate you working with the businesses too. Because part of safety is trying to understand, their loading zones, where they're putting things. And I know it's going to take time. It's not perfect. As I was riding my bike to MGH today, I bumped into trucks and bike, like 2 or 3, but we'll get there.
Just one last thing on this vein. This is sort of like, we did an ambitious project. It caused controversy, but what we're seeing here is that you are doing that due diligence later after you have data. You come back to it, you listen, things get done, but then you go back and you revisit and you hear, how it's been going, and then you act on that. So to me, this is just a great sort of story about, a really ambitious big project that ultimately really benefited folks and didn't hurt folks very much. And also hardships that have come up are being addressed now. Mm-hmm. So I echo all the thanks as well. And it really shows, so.
Bravo.
Thank you all. Appreciate that.
All right, let's keep doing that good work and due diligence, and it makes this community so phenomenal. So unless there's any more further discussion, I'd like a motion to accept or reject item number 7, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, elemental P, Q, R, S, T.
Motion to approve.
May I get a second, Lena?
Yes, I will second.
All right, can we get a roll call vote to approve item number 7?
Yes. Councilor Gomez Moacad? Lena Webb?
Yes.
Lieutenant Reimel?
Yes.
Deputy Chief Tierney?
Yes.
And that's 4 yes and 1 abstain, and the motion carries.
Wonderful. I believe that's the end of our agenda, correct?
Yes.
All righty. Thank you, team. This has been phenomenal. And again, I just want to compliment this committee on your due diligence and asking great questions and being willing to be in the arena and table things as needed to make sure that we are making the right decisions and just not a rubber stamp committee but we really are doing our part in making sure that when we say yes, we understand, and when we say no, we understand. So I really thank you for that. May I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion.
Sean, can I get a second?
Second,
Second,
All right, can I get a roll call vote to adjourn this incredible meeting?
Yes. Chair Lathan,
Yes.
Councilor Gomez Moacad,
Yes.
Lena Webb,
Yes.
Lieutenant Raimel,
yes.
Deputy Chief Tierney,
yes.
and that's 5 yes on the motion to adjourn.
All right, Groovy Tunes, cool beans. Thank you guys so much. Have a great
Waiting
night.
for that.
Good night.
See you later.